What's up guys and welcome back to Monique. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Heya, how you doing? If you're into the history between the ancient Greeks and the Romans, maybe you're just into the mythology, and maybe you're just here because you want to hear me rant a little bit more about Eumaeus as a character in Homer's Odyssey, well then this is not only the video for you, this is also the channel for you. You guys are going to want to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you know every single time I post in the future. But on topic of today's video, and as you can see from the title, we're going to be talking about book 15 of the Odyssey. So if I could summarize book 15 into a one sentence, it would just be that Eumaeus tells us his entire life story. Okay, I do want to say at the start of this episode though, that book 15 is basically like one of the most irrelevant books in a grander scheme of mythology, but also in the smaller scheme of just the Odyssey. Like nothing really happens. The only important thing is really that Eumaeus tells us who he is, like lineage wise, but even that doesn't impact the story. So a lot of this episode is going to be long story short, and also if you want to know this, then you should go and check out the book because there's literally no point of me explaining it all to you. So I'm not gonna harp on it. I'm just gonna tell you the very basic outline of the whole book, but it's been a whole minute, so why don't we just roll into the episode? So the book opens with Athena, and she goes to Sparta to go and find Telemachus. Because remember where I left you right at the start of the book, in fact, you guys might not remember, that right at the start of this whole Odyssey journey, Telemachus had gone to Sparta to speak to Menelaus, right? So she now has to go to Menelaus' palace to go and find him, to tell him, now is the time to get your booty home. So we pop to that scene. Athena shows up, it's the middle of the night, okay? And we've got Telemachus and Pisistratus, who is Nestor's son, if you've forgotten, or if you didn't watch the intro episodes of the Telemachy of this whole book, go do that. But either way, so Pisistratus is there, and he is Nestor's son. He's passed out, he's dead to the world, he's sound asleep on the porch, on these beds that the handmaidens in Menelaus's halls had made for them. Telemachus, on the other hand, he is tossing and turning. He is thinking about Odysseus. He is worried sick, okay? Like he doesn't know what's happening. He doesn't know where his dad is. And so because of that, he can't sleep. And Athena obviously sees her time to shine, and she goes down and she's like, since you're already awake, let's chat. She tells him that he's been away from home for far too long, and that also now is the time for him to go back because Icarius, who is Penelope's father, is starting to get involved with the whole suitor situation, and he wants Penelope to marry this guy called Eurymachus, who is, I've mentioned him before, but the reason why he wants her to marry him is because he has the highest bride price for her. So it's all about money. It all comes back to that. And Athena tells Telemachus that he's got to get home, save his mother, be the man of the house and all of this. And she's like, you got to be there like yesterday, okay? Because now is like a big deal. This is a turning point in the whole book, in the whole of Telemachus' story. And the last thing that she tells him is that there are some suitors who are waiting for him to pounce on the boat and to kill him on his journey home. So she's like, just so that you know, this is also waiting for you on Ithaca. Woohoo, how exciting! And because she's the goddess of Warcraft, I think everybody has this knee-jerk reaction in this moment when you're reading this scene, thinking she's gonna be like, here is this great spear of this hero, and here is this shield, and you're gonna fight them and be a man. And that is absolutely not what she says. In fact, she tells Telemachus, because this is not Telemachus' story, okay? This is not his time to shine. She tells him, just avoid it. She just says, like, take the long route home, go around these islands, give it a wide berth, I think is exactly what she says in the book. She's like, just go home the long way and then just deal with it later. That's my advice to you. And Telemachus, obviously, he's like, okay. And then she f***s off. Athena f***s off back to Olympus. So Telemachus rolls over and he wakes up Pisistratus, who is laying beside him, still dead to the world, has not heard this entire conversation. And Telemachus just goes, wake the fuck up, dude, I got things to tell you. And he tells him that they have to get the chariot together now because they have to go home. Well, he has to go home. So he's like, we have to leave, we need to get the chariot ready, we need to get everything done, put all the gifts on it, all of this sort of stuff. But it's the middle of the night, and so they get the chariot ready, and then they're like, we can't go anywhere because we need the gifts from Menelaus, and he's f***ing sound asleep upstairs, so we have to wait around till the morning anyways. Meaning the two of them do sit around until dawn, and when dawn rises, you know, Menelaus and Helen, they rise from their bed, and they're all like this happy, lovey couple and all of this, go downstairs. Telemachus is already waiting for him, and he's just like, hey man, I need to leave, like, now, which obviously catches Menelaus off guard. So he's a bit like, oh my god, I'm really sorry, like all of this, are you sure you want to leave? And he does this really weird thing where he offers Telemachus this like tour of Argus. He's like, you haven't been here for that long, and I don't want to be the host that keeps you longer than you have to, or that you want to be here, because that's the key. Like that's also part of being a good host, is knowing that when the guest wants to leave, they should be able to leave. But he does offer this grand tour of Argus, and he's just like, I do want to sell, you know, where I'm king of to you. And obviously Telemachus is like, no, this is not a good time. for your little tour. And so Menelaus hears him and he just says, okay, well then in that case, we're gonna get a whole feast for you. We're gonna get everything ready for you. We're gonna bring up all of the gifts and all this stuff and load them into your chariot and then we'll send you off. And they're all like, cool, that sounds great. So that's exactly what they do, okay? This is a long story short moment that I was describing at the beginning of this video. There's a very long description of the feast and who comes to the feast and what happens at the feast and what's fed at the feast, what's fed, what is served even at the feast, what people eat at the feast. That's a better way of describing that. And at the end of that, we have all of the gifts being brought out to the chariot and being loaded into the chariot by Menelaus's son, Menelaus's daughter, and Helen. And in fact, Helen even has a moment where she goes up to Telemachus and she gives him a gift and like explains it to him and all of this sort of stuff. I'm not going to mention it because it genuinely doesn't impact the rest of the story. But when they go outside, Menelaus walks out with them to send them off. And as they're about to ride off, there's an omen. Okay, obviously this is Greek mythology. We love a good omen and especially a bird omen. Homer loves a good bird omen. So we have one of those right now, right? Where this eagle comes out of nowhere, like seemingly comes out of nowhere and it it flies even down in front of all of the men and it picks up this goose. It's got this giant goose in its talons, right? And it goes right past them. And Pisistratus has a moment where he looks at Menelaus and he goes, was that for us or was that for you? Which, you know what? Good question. Gotta hand it to him. But like, that's the first time where they say, is this actually for me? Is this for you? Is this a joint one? And Menelaus says, I actually think it's for you guys. And he interprets the omen as meaning that the eagle is Odysseus and the goose symbolizes the suitors. And so Menelaus says that much like the eagle takes a long time to hunt, it takes a long time to actually catch something that big. Like there's a lot of doing, repetition, doing this again and again and again. Much like Odysseus, it took him a very long time to get home. It took him multiple tries to get back to Ithaca. But once he gets home, much like the eagle caught the goose, he will also catch the suitors because remember, Menelaus is up to date on all of this. He will catch the suitors, he will kill all of them, and he will reign victorious. And so Pisistratus and Telemachus are staring at him and they're just like, okay, that was great, thanks for that. And then they just turn around and they ride away, right? That's the end of that scene. Goodbye, Menelaus. Goodbye, Sparta. They start, riding off in their little chariot. Then, as I said before, it takes too long to get from Sparta to Pylos. There has to be a stop-off point in the middle. So they do stop off at this guy's house. Same guys before, stop off there, stay the night. And in the morning when they get on the chariot, Telemachus looks over at Pisistratus and he says, yo, bro, we're the same age. And after this, I kind of feel like we're more like brothers than friends. Like we're really tight after this whole little journey we've been on and all the stuff that we've experienced together. And because we're the same age, I do just feel like, that there's a bond going on here and it's really great. And, it's the gassing Pisistratus up because he's just like, yeah, I'm friends with Telemachus. This is amazing. And then Telemachus is like, right, so because of that, you can't take me back to Pylos. And obviously Pisistratus is like, huh? Because that's his dad, that's his family home. And that's like the hospitable thing to do, to drive him back to Pylos, send him off with a meal, and then he can go home to Ithaca. So Pisistratus is kind of taken aback by this, and Telemachus just explains like it has nothing to do really with them, that he says, you guys are wonderful people, wonderful family, I'm obsessed with your dad, like your dad is friends with my dad and all of this sort of stuff. However, I need to get home really quickly and Nestor is going to make me hang the fuck out for another few days because he's too kind, he's too nice, he's too hospitable. And, even though he's really appreciative, Telemachus is really appreciative, he doesn't have that much time. So Pisistratus hears him, but he's still, he doesn't really know what the right thing to do is. And he has this little dilemma in the chariot as he's holding the reins and he's just like, what the f***? Do I bring him back or do I bring him back to his boats? Because that's where Telemachus, he just wants to go straight back to his boats. And so Pisistratus eventually starts riding and he decides he's just going to take Telemachus to the boats. It's going to be the easiest thing. They get down to the shore and all the men are like, woohoo, Telemachus is back. And they all start loading everything from the chariot back up into the boat and they all start like making these offerings outside and all of this. And, Pisistratus then, he leaves to go home and the men continue, right? The men continue getting everything ready. And as Telemachus is about to get on the boat to like set sail, this random guy shows up out of nowhere. Okay, and I say random because I mean mythologically, he's random as shit. Like he literally doesn't pop up in any other place. His name is Theo. I think I'm just gonna call him Theo though for the sake of this video because it's far too long. And he doesn't pop up anywhere. Like it's not like with a lot of these characters, the reason why I mention names and all this is because they're either attached onto somebody important or their mythology does expand out. I told you guys in the introduction to this whole series that I would only be really focusing on people who are of importance to the story or of importance at a greater mythological, sort of realm, right? And this guy Theo, nowhere. He literally shows up on the beach, walks up to Telemachus. Telemachus turns around and he goes, who the f*** are you? And this guy is like, here is my whole family lineage. I'm going to tell you about my great-grandparents and my great-great-great-grandparents and how they all led me to be standing here in front of you. And it is the most ridiculous thing. It goes on for like a page, guys. Even as I was reading it, I was like, who are all these people that you're talking about? But it just explains how Theo came to stand in front of Telemachus. And Telemachus hears all of this, right? He listens the whole time, and he's like, thanks for like introducing yourself like that. You can get on the boat, obviously, but we're gonna go to Ithaca. Like, we're not stopping off anywhere else. So if you want to come to Ithaca, amazing. Come through, get on the boat, we'll drop you off on the island, no problems. Because I'm the Prince of Ithaca and I have to go home and speak to my dad, so we're not taking a detour. And Theo is always like, yeah, that's totally fine, because Theo like killed somebody. Like, it was like this whole drama thing. If you want to read that, go and read it, because I'm not explaining it. So they all get onto the boat together, and then they start sailing, and they sail through the night, because remember, they're taking the long route home because they don't want to come across the suitors who are waiting to pounce on Telemachus, right? It's not part of the plan. So because it takes so long, we then snap back to Odysseus in this moment, who is still with Eumaeus in his hut. Now, Odysseus has decided that he's going to test Eumaeus again. This is wild to me now that I'm reading it this time round, and when you don't read it in like a classroom setting, you start realizing how weird all of this stuff is. And the fact he's going to test Eumaeus again, the only reason that I can like come to understand this is that he wants to make sure that those closest to him on Ithaca are still on his side and not taking the side of the suitors. And that part I get, but it's still very strange because he just tested Eumaeus. Like, he just did it the night before. I described it in book 14. So I'm like, why are we doing it again? He's already proved himself. He has already proved that he is Odysseus's #1 fan. What more could this man do? Genuinely, someone tell me. Anywho, that was a little digression there, but back to the story. So they're sitting at the table and they're chit-chatting, having a good evening. And when they have put aside their desire for food and drink, that is literally what the Greek says, by the way, that is the phrasing. Then they start talking about the islands and about Ithaca, and Odysseus in disguise decides that his test is going to be to see if Eumaeus will house him for another night in his hut. So Odysseus starts this by saying, thank you so much for your hospitality. Like, you're a really kind person, but I don't want to be eating you out of house and home. I don't want to be taking up space. You guys don't have enough space as it is for me, so I do appreciate the one night. And he explains how he's gonna go down to the palace. He wants to go and talk to Penelope. He wants to go and stay with the suitors. He thinks he's gonna socialize with them and like, what, be friends? Like, you're disguised as a beggar. Obviously, that's the whole point. It's supposed to be a ridiculous plan. So he says, this is my plan. I'm gonna go and do this because I don't want to be here anymore taking up your space. And obviously, internally, he's just like, if this man doesn't offer me another night, I'm gonna have a word. Eumaeus replies in a very typical Eumaeus way, where he just looks at Odysseus in disguise and he goes, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Don't do that. The suitors are gonna literally eat you alive in there. So you should just stay here because there's just no point. And he says to Odysseus in disguise that he should probably wait until Telemachus comes back, because at least if Telemachus is in the palace, at least he'll be like, accepted into the palace more so than just having the suitors run amok. They're going to kick him out because he's a beggar. They're not gonna allow him to stay. Remember, they're rude as okay, and that's highlighted in this moment by Eumaeus. So the conversation keeps going because Eumaeus, he passes the test, right? Conversation keeps going between them, and the next really important part that they get to is where Eumaeus starts telling Odysseus the reason why he loves Odysseus' family. He's telling Odysseus in disguise why he loves Odysseus' family. This is getting more and more complicated to describe this scene, but anyways, he describes how much he loves the family and why he loves them so much. And the reasoning is because he says that when he was a really young boy, he was raised by Odysseus' mother alongside Odysseus' sister, so his mother's youngest daughter. Him and her, yes. The girl and Eumaeus are the same age. Now, the girl goes under this name. The reason why I'm not saying it is because I genuinely don't know how to pronounce even a CT. So if there is a Greek person, is the C silent? Is it like a PT sound? I don't know. Someone tell me, but this is her name, right? So she was raised at the same time as Eumaeus, and they grew up like siblings, right? That's why he loves them, because he got to experience the family firsthand. He grew up really, really close to Odysseus' sister. However, when she became of age, she was obviously married off, and so she left, and so that's why he doesn't still have a close relationship with her, because she's not there anymore. And he stresses that he was raised like a child of their own. Like, he stresses that he wasn't raised like, a servant. He wasn't raised like the swineherd that he became. He became the swineherd because that's, the role that he had to take on, but he was raised like a child, like among other children. And he was raised like part of the family, and he really appreciates Odysseus and his whole family, including, Laertes and Anticlea and all of this, for that reason, which is so wholesome. Like, genuinely, it's so wholesome when you're reading it, you're like, stop. And Odysseus in disguise, in reply to this, he does say to Eumaeus, well, if you were raised in the house, then you must have been brought here when you were really, really young in order to be raised that way, or, what happened to your parents and all this. He starts questioning because he wants to know, like, what's up with Eumaeus? Like, what's up with his backstory and all of this? And Eumaeus dives into probably one of the most traumatic childhood stories that we have from mythology. Like, I'm not saying that with a smile on my face, because it is actually hard to read. Like, it's really sad. And he describes how he's actually from another island, which is called Syrie, Syrie. And when he grew up on that island, he was actually from like noble birth, right? So he's from like the actual like regal family of that island. He grew up in the palace. He grew up really, really well and really wealthy. And he had a really privileged life, he said, as like a very young kid, until one day on the island appeared this group of Phoenicians. So this group of Phoenicians, he calls them bandits in the book. They appeared, there were loads of them, and there was one woman with them. And this one woman shows up to the palace, and like everybody on the entire island like falls in love with her because she looks super foreign and she's super hot. And so everybody was like, oh my God, this woman is amazing. And that's how they end up striking this deal. Very long story short, this is another one of those moments. They end up striking this deal and staying on the island for an entire year. These Phoenicians stay on the island, and there's like no problems. They're just sort of like, you know, trying to be at one with the people of this island, but they were scheming the whole time. Like, they had this whole plan, they had this whole scheme because they wanted to make money, basically. And so one day, Eumaeus's mother ends up getting distracted, right? And the Phoenician woman had sort of taken care of Eumaeus, so Eumaeus, you know, trusted her and everything like that. She was like very much a nurse sort of figure to him. And when his mother is distracted, the Phoenician woman just picks him up and takes him onto the boat, and then all the Phoenicians leave the island. So they literally abduct Eumaeus as a kid, which is awful to read. Like, it genuinely is quite an awful story to read, because he describes how he was on the boat for 6 days and 6 nights. And during that period, the Phoenician woman actually died. So he didn't even have like a motherly figure on the boat. It was just all of these kind of like strange men who he was with on the boat, because this woman, the only person he trusted, didn't last the ship journey because like Artemis came down and shot her and all of this. Again, figuratively. We need to remember that that's all like a figurative imagery type thing. Either way, she doesn't make it. And they end up dropping him off on Ithaca. They sort of, you know, bring him there, and Anticlea takes him in. So after this traumatic experience, which is why he says, I love this family because I had this terrible time, this terrible thing. I was abducted as a child, brought on this boat, brought to this island. They could have easily cast me out, and they didn't. Instead, they raised me like their own. And he says that he'll forever be in debt to them because of that, which is a really beautiful story. And even Odysseus in disguise is sitting there, and he's just like, oh my God, the misery of this story. What? Would recommend reading that, because even Odysseus in disguise, like, his heart is totally moved, and the pair actually end up talking all night. Like, they talk until like the early hours of the morning until they like fall asleep, right? And then obviously we snap back to Telemachus, because then we snap back to it being morning, but he's now on the beach of Ithaca. He gets dropped off, and all the men, you know, they have this little like feast for him or whatever, because they're going to continue going around the side of the island to the main port to then be dropped off closer to the palace to go and say hi to all their families, you know, like to go home and do all of that. So that's what they're going to do. They drop him off on this little beach. And when he gets off on the beach, that actually Theo, the random prophet, comes up to him. Did I mention that he was a prophet? I hope I did. He's a seer of sorts. Anyways, he comes up to Telemachus, and he's just like, yeah, bro, so now that we're on Ithaca and you're leaving, what do I do? Like, where do I go? And obviously part of you is reading this just being like, that's not Telemachus's like highest priority right now, is to figure out what the happens to this random guy. He asks, and Telemachus does say to him like, well, I wouldn't go to the palace. And he's like, don't go there. It would not be a good idea because of all the suitors. He said, you know, in other circumstances, I would obviously invite you back to my home. That is the hospitable thing to do, but I'm not in control of my home at the moment, and it's overrun by all of these suitors. There's no room for you because they will be really rude and it's going to be really awful, so don't do that. And instead, Telemachus turns to one of his crewmates and he says, can you house him for the meantime until I get this whole thing under control? And the guy from the boat is like, yeah, sure, no problem. He can totally bunk with me and my family. It's going to be fun. And Theo is obviously like, great, that's amazing. And so then he gets back on the boat, and the boat off around the side of Ithaca, and we don't hear from them again. By that, I don't mean that they died. I just want to clarify. That sounded like I went, and then they died. No, they just leave. They're just not important characters. So then they sort of sail off, and they leave Telemachus on the beach though. And the last scene that we get from this book is Telemachus tying up his sandals and getting himself ready and marching off towards the swineherd's home, where we know that Odysseus is there, but he's in disguise. So Telemachus has no idea really why he has to go to the swineherds, but we know that he's about to be reunited with his dad after like 18, 19, 20 long years. And it is so exciting. It's so wholesome. And yeah, that's sort of where the book ends. It is where the book ends. So there was a lot in that book that I didn't get into in detail. I don't think it's really needed for these episodes, quite honestly. I will focus more so on the books, as I have been doing, the books that really require the detail, the ones that you're going to need for school. They're the ones that are important for surrounding mythology, you know, so all of the weird monsters and stuff that was needed. You know, Telemachus coming home from Sparta is not that important. You just need to know that he did come home from Sparta, and you need to know that he is now approaching Odysseus, right? That's it. That's all you really need to know. Theo never pops up again. So don't even worry about that storyline, and I wouldn't really worry about Eumaeus's little family backstory in a wider sense of mythology. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll be seeing you next time with book 16 of Homer's Odyssey. So we'll see you then.